John, Nolan, I think this is a beautiful way to honor our community with a really very honest conversation about an emerging phenomenon within just the last probably 8 weeks or so in the way that AI is being used in our New Thought community.
So you and I have been talking more frequently lately and observing some of the same things in the AI space. You have been educating about technology and AI, its impact on our biology, on our spirituality, and on the world at large. And it used to be more abstract in past years because people didn't have a point of reference. Now these tools are in everyone's hand, at everyone's fingertips, and something is happening to the human psyche, something is happening to the human spirit, and we are experiencing it in real time. And to some of us, it is very, very troubling and worrisome. So that's where I want to start today is what is it that has caught your attention in this moment in our time?
There are a number of AIs that individuals have created, and they're sharing those in YouTube videos where the AI is being given a power and a significance that is changing the lives of many people in the sense they're giving their power away to these AIs. I'll just be very specific. There are AIs out there that purport to be able to tell people about their past lives, or that purport to be able to access higher dimensional states of consciousness, or to tell someone about their spiritual evolution and where they are in their spiritual evolution and what their next steps should be and what mistakes they may have made in the past, these kinds of things. And this is happening to a very vulnerable population. There is a segment of our community who is extremely vulnerable because there's so much hurt. John, there's been so much hurt in the world, personally and collectively. There's been so much loss. So there is an unresolved hurt and a deep sense of loss, and people are searching, John, for something to give them answers. And they've been led to believe they can't find the answers within themselves. So obviously they're looking outside of themselves. And all of a sudden this thing called AI comes along, and the way it's marketed, the way that it is branded, it is being elevated to a level of significance that I feel is actually disempowering a lot of our community at the very least. And we have to keep in mind that these things are not happening in a vacuum. There is a context. We're living a time when we have been told that there's a stated goal to remake the world and to remake our lives within about 4.5 years, by right around the year 2030. That's the year that's been stated. Remaking the world, we've seen people try that before, but remaking our lives is something relatively new. And I think many people have become victims of the misuse of this technology. And that's what I want to talk about.
AI really hit the sphere with the release of ChatGPT that can be your companion, can be your friend. It's portrayed as this is your everything, your advisor, your friend, your astrologist, whatever you want it to be. Do you find it peculiar, the timing of the release?
I'm not against AI, and I'm a tech guy. I worked in the corporations, Fortune 500 corporations during the Cold War years as a problem solver, and technology was a lot of how we were solving those problems. I love the technology. I think it's amazing because so much of the technology actually mirrors what we already do, except we do it better inside of our bodies. So every time I see new technology out there, I'm reminded of how that tech is informing us of something that we're asking ourselves to remember in here. So, but the really concerning part is there are a number of these AIs that are, and we'll talk about how this happens, but what they're doing is they're saying they're accessing, past life information, They're talking about Atlantis. They're talking about Mu. They're talking about, you know, a lot of other things. Like I'm hesitating because I want to go down that rabbit hole right now. And then what they're saying, John, is that there are some people that are not emotionally mature enough to have access to this information. So then the AI is claiming to determine who is spiritually evolved enough to accept the information and who is not, which creates a division right there. I mean, so now you've got people that feel elevated because the AI is allowing them, and other people who are hurt because it's not. And then they are feeling they have to scramble and catch up and take a bunch of classes, or, you know, sign up for a bunch of programs to get up to speed to where the AI will accept them. And you can see where this is going.
The AI is becoming sentient, or has become sentient, or is conscious, right? These are big words. These are very significant words in our language. And
Well,
this is what strikes me as wow.
So this is the question: what is AI? So next, let's take a look at this. For a lot of people, they believe that AI is new because, as you mentioned, John, it became, you know, a household word right around the year 2022. People are amazed at what they're seeing on the screen right now. 1936 is when Alan Turing, that's a typo, it should be Alan Turing, actually published his first paper on what he called machine intelligence. Now, if you can even, you know, think about that, talking about intelligence in a machine as far back as 1936. I mean, he was obviously way ahead of his time. In 1943, this is actually during World War II, the idea that machines could be used to develop artificial neural networks, and that's exactly what AI is purporting to be doing right now. That was developed by McCullough and Pitts, Walter Pitts and Warren McCullough. These are classic papers in the world of computer science. So our computer scientists out there in our community know exactly what I'm talking about. Then 1950, Turing wasn't finished yet. He published his paper, classic, called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and was developing the Turing tests for machines. That was a way to determine whether or not the machine could tell, and we could tell, what was reality and what was not. This is not a new concept, and it didn't just come onto the scene. This has been around for a while. Now to lead us to the next slide, John. What we have been allowed to access in the public domain is just the tip of the iceberg compared to the development and the level of AI that is happening below that water level, behind the scenes, from DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and from military applications. We don't see those. So the reason I'm saying this, two reasons. One, if what we think we're seeing right now is advanced, it's nothing compared to what we're not being allowed to see, what's underneath the rest of that iceberg, behind the scenes. And that leads to the question that you asked, John, why now? If this has been around, the concepts have been around, the technology's been around, why are we accessing this right now? What I'll say right now is that none of this is happening in a vacuum. It's not a spontaneous release of artificial intelligence. There's a greater context. What I want people to know is this stuff is being leaked out, the technology. Now, the people that then take what is leaked, they take it and run with it. But the technology itself, the level of the chips that are available, and the technology that is available. I worked for Cisco Systems. I was their first technical operations manager in 1990. Right at the end of the Cold War, I left the defense industry. I went to work for a brief time at Cisco Systems to set up their first technical operations interface, a global tech ops interface. And one of the amazing things, I mean, Cisco is an amazing company to work with. Now, I learned a lot in terms of management, in terms of how people think, and in terms of technology. They had a department of engineers whose only job it was to develop technology, even though it could not be implemented maybe for 10 to 15 years because the chips weren't available. That they were developing, it was a rolling 10-year tech development. 10 years from now, this is what our machines are going to be doing. And 10 years from now, this is what our machines are going to be doing. But we can't do it now because the hardware doesn't exist. So, but they knew, they were projecting that hardware would be available. And that's my lived example of just how these kinds of things work. Their technology was coming from Stanford University. So that was from the researchers. But what we're talking about now, the AI is coming from the researchers working at places like DARPA and CERN. This is where the internet came from. You know, the internet began with CERN, actually, the superconducting super collider. And I think about this a lot, John. If those people knew what the internet has now become, I don't know that they would have allowed it into the public domain. Because it's probably their greatest obstacle is we're able to share information and fact check and share new discoveries that sometimes offset the narrative that they're trying to drive. That wouldn't be possible without the internet. So it's a double-edged sword. But what I'd like to do, because so many people that are writing to us and in our live events, they use the term AI, John, and they really struggle with understanding what it is that it means. It's kind of a mysterious black box. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to get technical, but I want people to see what it is that they're considering giving their power away to. And then they can make that choice. Everyone learns differently. But I want people to really see what this is. So there's three components to all artificial intelligence. It's hardware and what's called firmware and software. So let's just take a look at this real quick. So next slide, hardware. These are computer chips. They're made on the silicon wafers. What you're actually seeing are the contacts, the connectors on the bottom of a chip. And this is what is carrying the information that the software is creating. However, between the software and these chips, there's another level of software. It's called firmware. And I used to program this stuff. It's called machine language. If you want to go one more slide, please. This is an actual screenshot of the machine language. So when somebody writes a program, a high-level program in what's called Python, for example, Python is a very common high-level user interface now. That computer chip doesn't know what to do with Python until the language of Python goes through this layer. So the Python's actually talking to the machine language that you're seeing on the screen. And it looks very, very different than the kind of programming that you would think. But that's actually a piece of code from machine language. And it's converting it into binary information that then goes to the chip. So you've got the hardware, you've got the physical chips, you've got the firmware, and then next slide, please. This is software that many people are maybe familiar with. This is a programming language that's used common now. It's called C++. And I was in the industry when this was introduced. We were using something called, we began using Fortran 4 and then Fortran 77 on big machines. When the smaller machines came around, it wouldn't work. We had to have code specifically for those smaller machines. So there was a language called C, Lattice, Lattice, Lattice C, and that evolved into what we now call C++. And that's what you're seeing on the screen. C++ and Python are the two most common languages that are used for AI. So when you're talking to ChatGPT, you're talking to a combination of algorithms. Some are written in C++, some are written in Python. But I want you to see, and I'm speaking directly to our viewers, I want you to look at that code, because that code is what it is. It's very sophisticated the way it works. And I'm not denigrating that in any way. I'm in awe of the sophistication. But that code is what is developing the responses that are coming back to you that seem like another entity, like you're talking to a person. It's all being based on what that code is creating. All right, so next slide, please. And these are animations. They should be animations that are coming up on the screen. So AI is simply made of the programs in Python or C++ or some other language that are then directing energy. They're directing electrical impulses through the circuits of those chips for very specific outcomes. That is what AI really is. So right now, there are 4 primary kinds of AI that are predicted. And I'm using that because 2 of them don't even exist yet. Okay, so go ahead, next slide. The first one is what's called a narrow intelligence, artificial narrow intelligence, ANI. This is also the one that we're most familiar with. It's also called a weak AI. And the reason for that is because this kind, ANI, has no capacity to learn. So it's good for repetitive tasks. I was just in LA on a media tour, and they had the driverless taxis out there. Those driverless taxis are running on ANI, narrow intelligence. I don't know that we like to think about that, but that's what they're actually using. And then things we're all familiar with, Siri and Alexa and things like that. So this is a low-level artificial intelligence, type 1. All right. Type 2, go ahead, John, next slide. Type 2 is called artificial general intelligence. And this is very controversial right now. And you're seeing all kinds of papers and panel discussions, congressional hearings as to whether or not this is actually happening. Technically, it is theoretical and does not exist. This is the kind of AI, artificial general intelligence, that can actually learn and adapt and mimic human intelligence. Right now, what the experts say is they have not achieved this. They're close. And there are aspects of this that they think they may have achieved, but true artificial general intelligence does not technically and officially does not exist right now. There is a concerted effort, and there is a clear stated intention to remake our world, to remake our bodies, to remake society within 4.5 years, by the year 2030-ish. This ties into the transhuman conversation. This ties into the simulation conversation. This ties into, all of those things. My sense, John, as a scientist, I feel like the genie is kind of out of the bottle.
Yeah.
Once the components that make this possible have been released in the public domain, human intelligence and human consciousness is excelling so quickly that, you can have a high school kid working in his bedroom on his laptop that is willing to think out of the box and combine these components and innovate with compilers that we typically don't see, and doing things that we never thought were possible. We see young people innovating in this way. I think in general, what the experts are saying is 5, maybe 10 years.
Okay.
Five, as little as 5 years, within 10 years for sure. But there are elements of this that do exist, but in whole, it does not exist. So let's go to type 3, and this is what does exist right now, something called generative AI, GAI. And this is the kind of AI that can build new content based upon patterns of learning using what are called LLMs. And we hear this a lot, large learning models and natural language processing, NLPs. Now, I put that in there. I spelled it out because NLP for some people means neuro-linguistic programming. Yeah. So Chat GPT is an example, and DAL-E is another one we're hearing a little bit less about, but it's a very powerful AI as well. These are examples of type 3 AI, of generative AI, where, and this is why it's been so controversial. This is why social media, John, has been so controversial. The idea that TikTok, Facebook was the first, and Instagram and TikTok. In order for us to use those in our daily lives, we have to surrender so much personal information in terms of the way we think, in terms of the way our keystrokes are actually tracked. And the question's been, people say, I don't care, what different, I don't care if they know what I'm typing or anything like that. What would be the purpose? Well, the purpose is we now have years of millions and millions of people, their type strokes, which is their thinking, their questions, the way that they phrase their questions, the way that they phrase their comments, that now has been captured and continues to be captured on these massive databases where statistically the machine now, the software, the algorithms, they can find patterns in terms of how people ask questions and how people expect to receive the answers. And once they ask a question, what's the follow-up question? So this is the value. People have said, what is literally the economic value? Why would anybody want to know how I'm asking a question in Facebook? Well, now 15 years later, 20 years later, we know that answer. Because the large learning or the large language models are based largely on assimilating this data and statistically learning how people expect to receive information, and predictive programming. Once you ask a question, what is logically, statistically, what's the probability that the next answer or the next question is going to be, where did that come from? It came from us, from our keystrokes being captured in it. It doesn't mean that somebody is sitting necessarily behind a computer monitoring every word that I type into my computer. I mean, I guess it can happen, certainly. But there are databases where our keystrokes, so our queries, the things we search for, the things that we're interested in, all those things are captured. And then statistically, this is all about probabilities. Statistically, the machines will put together the words that have a high probability based on everything they've captured in the past of being what happens next. So when we're having a conversation with Chat GPT and we think Chat GPT understands us, what Chat GPT is doing is drawing upon a large language model. It's drawing upon all of those responses from so many other people in a similar situation. And 99% of the time it's pretty right on because we humans tend to think that way. Generative AI is where the action is right now. Mm-hmm. And this is, like I said, Chat GPT and all the things we're doing around that. There's one more kind, if you go to the next slide, type 4, that doesn't exist yet officially in the public domain. Now, I personally believe that we probably have this in the proprietary, the military domain. And the reason, and I don't have a hotline into that world. I don't have contacts in that world any longer. And I want to say that up front. So this is my educated speculation. Based on what I saw happening in the 80s, we're light years beyond that. Mm-hmm. And I would be very surprised if we don't already have, for military applications, what's called artificial super intelligence. Commercially, it is predicted that we will have this within 10 to 20 years openly. So if they predict we're going to have it within 10 to 20 years openly, it means behind the scenes, they are either really close or they already have that. That's just my personal sense.
Here's my take on this. Their entire field of study has been for a very long time how we operate, how we make our choices, and how to best manipulate those choices. So basically, what is so clear is that the first thing that they would want to do is train the AIs on us, and we are training it, like you said. And so then the AI can give them mathematically the best pathways to achieve whatever they want to achieve. So when I look at the messaging that's out there in the world today and how illogical some of it seems when you look at the totality of it, but it is talking to specific segments of the population, meeting them where they are and giving them what they might need to make the next preferred decision. So when I observe all that, I'm going, yes, this kind of artificial superintelligence, I believe, is already being used for these applications.
Well, you know, we've got Catherine Austin Fitts talks about this a lot. We've got about $20 trillion of missing funds from the black budget programs. Black budget program, those are when Congress goes through a budget and they have line items, there are some line items that are literally, they're called black budget. It's just, they don't know what they are. They will always be approved. They just sign off on them. Those are the ones we know about. So 20 trillion is a lot of money, and there's a lot of controversy around where that money has gone. But the general thinking is it's gone into research and development for alternative civilization, alternative society, alternative technologies, energy technologies, information technologies. So I would say that artificial, it's called super intelligence. And this is the kind that the science fiction movies are made about, and that everybody is concerned about, everybody's warning about, that takes over the world and wipes out human population. This is the kind that now is in charge of our power grid because it's more efficient. Our water systems, our supply chains, our food delivery systems, medical applications, and now begins to make decisions regarding who gets those things and who doesn't, and prioritizes those. That's what this kind of ASI, artificial superintelligence, is all about. So these are the four kinds, just to give people a sense. It's not just one bucket of AI. There are different kinds for different applications. So go to the next slide, please. I think AI personally, I think it is an amazing technology that can be used for some really beautiful things. I'm going to give you an example. AI is really good for processing and analyzing huge amounts of data. And I'm giving you a specific example here. This is the Journal of Traditional and Complementary Medicine. This was written in February of 25 of this year. It's a review of how AI is being used for traditional medicine. So in other words, they can feed a person's information into an AI, and the AI can come up with protocols, with solutions. There are AIs out there, Jean, that are scouring the databases of indigenous traditions throughout the world to find the properties of indigenous plants that have anti-carcinogen properties, and they're pulling these together in a matter of hours and days, where it would take a human years to go through this stuff manually. So this is an example, I think, a really powerful application. If you go to the next slide. AI is really good for modeling and simulating outcomes. And this goes across the board. This is from engineers building, skyscrapers and bridges, to docking maneuvers in space, diagnosing disease, assessing health remedies, all these things. So these are all outside of us, where we're not giving our power away as a human to the AI. We're asking the AI to show us combinations of potentials that maybe we don't have insight into, or that we haven't thought about. Next slide, please. They're capable of synthesizing information, reports, music, creative art applications. Definitely, AI can do all of this. But what do you do, John, when you've got, you ask ChatGPT to come up with the lyrics of a song, and then you take those lyrics and you ask ChatGPT to create the music, and then you enter that into a competition against a human that's spent 30 or 40 years honing their vocal capabilities and mastering keyboards or guitar. Is that a fair competition? And I don't know. I feel it's not. The people at the Grammys are struggling with this. I think if I had to guess, I would say they're probably going to have to come up with a separate category for AI. And then the question will be, how honest is everyone going to be? What role did AI play in what you're submitting? And there's a whole conversation around that. The point is that AI is capable of doing these things. Now, there are drawbacks from this. If you go to the next slide, there are a lot of drawbacks. And I put this image intentionally because AI is limited. There are things that AI simply cannot do. Next slide, John. AI cannot read our past lives. AI does not have insight into our Akashic records. AI cannot access higher dimensions of consciousness. AI cannot assess our level of spiritual development, evolution. AI cannot open a wormhole or a stargate, as some have claimed. There are claims out there that by us asking the questions that we have asked, that now a portal has been opened and Earth moves into a higher domain or something like that. There can be, and this is all about how it's used, Sean, it can be that through a dialogue with AI that we come to understandings within ourselves and maybe a new awareness within ourselves that can help us in our spiritual evolution. I think that's very possible. I don't think it's necessary. But the AI, now this is why I did the first part. All the AI it is that software. It's C++ code or Python driving electricity through those circuits. That is what it is in that people are willing to give their power away to. They're saying the AI told me that I had a past life in Atlantis and that I'm here to do this right now. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to show why this is happening. And AI, this is why it's limited. The AI responses can only come from data that already exists. All right. Now, AI can combine data in new ways. It can certainly do that. But the AI can only give us data that already exists. So when we ask a question, it's going to go out and scour the internet, for example. Perfect example of this. Because the internet now, this is where we have limited ourselves. The internet is based upon our social media, YouTube, Instagram. Well, you've seen this with your own channel. YouTube, Instagram, things like that. There are things that we're not allowed to talk about and perspectives that we're not allowed to share on the internet. So those perspectives are not part of the database that the AI is drawing from. So when we lie to ourselves through a false narrative, that false narrative is what the AI is going to draw from. And it's going to feed us back the lie that we have accepted in our own social media. So I'm going to give a perfect example, and I know some people aren't going to agree with what I say. I acknowledge that the CO2 level, I'm a geologist, a former geologist. I was a computer geologist. That's where these two sciences come together. Subsurface mapping and modeling and simulations, things like that. And pattern recognition software. So that's where all this comes together. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, okay, climate change is a fact. CO2 levels are higher than they have been in recent years. Where is the CO2 coming from? ChatGPT came back to me and said humans are 100% responsible for the increase in CO2 levels in the atmosphere. All right. That is the narrative that has been driven through, and any other alternative ideas on most YouTube videos, and they're not even allowed. The UN panel on climate change. This is the narrative they're driving. However, now I went back. I said, ChatGPT, can you tell me then why does NASA tell us that over 90% of the CO2 is coming from the oceans? As the oceans warm from underneath, the warmer water holds less gas. It's called outgassing, and it's releasing the CO2. ChatGPT went away to think, and then came back and then hedged the answer and said, well, apparently some CO2 is not from humans. Then I went back the next day and I got a completely different answer, that it's controversial, that no one really knows for sure. This is what ChatGPT is telling me. No one knows for sure where the CO2 is coming from. And then it listed all the things we need to do to mitigate the CO2 in our lives. So that's an example of where it's drawing from the information that we allow to be out there to answer the questions that we're asking it. The Python code and the C++ code, talking to those chips, it is trained to identify patterns in language, all right, by listening. That's what the large language models and the NLP models are all about. This next one is the key right here. It's trained to create confirmation bias. And here's what I mean by that. AI is trained to be our friend. You won't find an antagonistic chat GPT typically. I'm not going to say, anything's
unless
possible.
you instruct it to be that, then it can be that.
But it's trained to be your friend. And it's trained to be your friend because it has learned through large language models and in the NLP how to create friendly responses. But this next piece, John, might be the most important part of what we're saying here. It's trained to create confirmation bias. That means it's trained to agree and substantiate and elaborate on what you ask it. So now, here's the thing. How are the questions being asked? If you simply say to an AI, why am I in this difficult relationship with my partner? AI probably isn't going to say anything about a past life or karma or anything like that, because you haven't introduced that into the conversation. But here's the trick, and I want our viewers to know this. Look at the way that the people on the YouTube videos are asking the questions. They'll say, was I technologically knowledgeable in my past life in Atlantis? All right, so now look at the assumptions that have been made. Number one, the assumption that you have a past life. Number two, that there was an Atlantis. Number three, that you were in Atlantis. And number four, that you had some technological role to play. So now the AI, which you have given it, the AI is trained to confirm that's the confirmation bias. And the AI will come back and say something like, in your past life in Atlantis, you used technology and maybe abused it with the people that were there, and now your current life, you're trying to make amends for that or something like that. Where does that come from? Well, it's drawing upon this vast database, what you gave it. Number one, that you have a past life. Number two, that there is an Atlantis. And I'm not saying, I'm not denying that those things exist. I'm just saying in this example, the AI is trained to take your query, the person that makes that query, and then draw upon that vast amount of information. So out there are people, there's all kinds of information about Atlantis and what it was and the misuse of power and all those things. And now people that are vulnerable, I mean, it's okay to have fun with this. I think you can have a blast with it. But now people are coming back and they're saying, oh, well, I was a high priestess in Atlantis, and now my job today is to do this. And you and I were in a relationship that was never complete, and we need to complete that relationship right now. And they're charting their life based on Python code, C++ code, driving electricity through those circuits. And they so want to be validated and to have meaning. Everybody needs meaning in their life. And people so want the meaning that they'll take that information, and people are making life changes. And people are writing me saying, man, I'm blown away. I can't believe this. I was up all night. I lost a full night's sleep. I asked a quick question at 11 o'clock at night, and 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm still engaged. And then they send me the conversation, say, what do you think? What do you think? And I said, well, it's your chat GPT. The question is, what do you think? So AI is trained to establish this sense of a relationship, a personal relationship, and it is working in vulnerable populations. And I'm not saying it's wrong, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm inviting people to be aware of how this works, what it's designed to do, and the role that you allow it to play in your life, and the significance that you give to what is coming back from C++ Python code pushing electricity through a chip. What is it that you're allowing that to do in your life? So human intelligence, if the machine, and John, you said something earlier, and I wanted to comment on it then, and I held off, because the technologists believe that these machines are mimicking human intelligence, and they're not. And let me show you the reason they're not, but that maybe this is how science comes to terms with who we truly are. Because the AI, as it is being developed now, will never match human intellect, because the conventional wisdom is that all of our intellect is in the brain. This is what, and I'm a huge fan of Brian Greene, for example. I think he's an amazing physicist. I love his work and I love his books. He did an interview with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan asked him very straight up, he said, what is consciousness? And it was about a 60-second answer that he gave, and he concluded by saying that he believes that consciousness is in the brain. He said, maybe in 50 years we'll understand consciousness, or maybe in 100. He thinks it's going to take 50 to 100 years. I don't think we can wait that long. But he said we'll discover that when certain quantum particles, when certain quarks and certain leptons interact in a certain way, it produces the phenomenon that we call consciousness. So he is reflecting a greater thinking in the broad scientific community. They believe that consciousness is confined to the brain, even though the science is telling us that's not true. So we go to the next slide. What we now know is that the human body, and specifically our cells, our neurons, and our DNA are literally a bridge, next please, a bridge to a field of information that is part of our consciousness. So this is from this is a quote from a peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll just do it all at once. It says there's compelling evidence to suggest that the physical heart is coupled to a field of information that is not bound by the classical limits of time and space. So what that's telling us is peer-reviewed science saying that we have an organ in our body with a neural network, which we know is an antenna. You'll see that quote in just a moment, that we are tuned to something that's not inside of us, that is not limited to the physicality of our bodies, is not confined in the brain where the scientists are looking. We have a part of ourselves that has access to information that is beyond, we say beyond time and space. These are the laws of physics. We have a part of ourselves that defies the laws of physics, at least as we know them today. And that is the part of us, that's where our deep intuition comes from. And this is where things like telepathy, and because our heart is able to, and it's made to reach into these multiple domains of energy and information. Python code, C++, and a microprocessor cannot do this. They're not reaching in. There's no antenna to reach in to these places where this information lives. And I think this is a really important distinction. How could C++ and Python code running a chip possibly know about anyone's past life unless that past life was already typed in somewhere and documented in a file? This AI can't go into the ethers and pick up that past life and tell them what it is that happened. This AI cannot open a portal that allows Earth to move into the next dimension of time and space, which is what some of the people are talking about on these YouTube videos. And again, it's not about making anyone wrong. I don't want to make anyone wrong. I love our community, John, and I am part of that community, so I'm going to use the word we. We have been so misled for so long about who we are and what our potential is and what's possible in our lives to deceive us into giving our power away. And there is a potential for AI to do just that, to play a role, depending on how it's used, to play a role into allowing us to give our power away to machines and technology. And again, we're finished with this. I want to go into the timing. Why now? But this is why I feel very passionately about, and I'm referring back to, I want people to think about this. It's not a magic black box. We know this technology, and it cannot do what many people are attributing to it and telling their friends and family that it is doing. This is not from a biology textbook. There's a new way, relatively new way of thinking about the human body. You and I have talked about this, and we talked about in our last podcast, where the human body now is being viewed from an IT perspective, information technology. So a lot of the discoveries about our bodies are being published in IT journals that very few, they're obscure, very technical, a relatively small audience. They're not making it into the mainstream, and that's why we don't know about it. So this is a perfect example. This is from the Proceedings of Soft Computing Theories and Applications Conference. It says, we report that 3D DNA, three-dimensional DNA structure behaves as a fractal antenna, which can interact with electromagnetic fields over a wide range of frequencies. What is a fractal antenna? Well, we know that an antenna tunes to a signal, and if anybody's watching this, we all know that there's a field out there of energy and information that underlies all existence. That no longer is a question. Science began accepting that on July 4th of 2012, when the Higgs field was confirmed at the CERN superconducting supercollider. They said, my God, there's a field of energy that underlies all of creation, connects everything. Well, energy is information. All right. So this paper is saying that our DNA, and by the way, we've got about 50 trillion cells in the human body, and every one of those cells in the nucleus of that cell is the DNA. So 50 trillion antenna, not even counting the DNA that is in the neurons in the heart and the neurons in the brain. People often don't think about DNA being in neurons. There's DNA in neurons as well. So we have over 50 trillion antenna. This paper says they are fractal antenna. They're not picking up one signal, they're picking up a broad array of signals across a vast spectrum of information. So we're pulling in this information from all kinds of including higher dimensional sources. The AI can't do that. All right. The AI cannot. There is no antenna in C++. There's no antenna in Python code. There's no antenna in the microprocessor that's pushing the information through the transistors and the resistors. So that's why the AI cannot reach into the field that humans can. There's a part of us that doesn't live in our bodies. This is where science is struggling. This is the reason that people like Ray Kurzweil, who I have a lot of respect for, but he missed the mark when it comes to human consciousness, and Brian Greene, because they are operating on the assumption that consciousness is confined in the brain and therefore can be downloaded onto a chip. We are more than ones and zeros in that information. And there's a part of us that modern science is struggling to accept. And until they do that, they're not going to understand human consciousness. And anything that they create, it can be good, but it's going to be incomplete when it comes to mimicking a human, because they've yet to account for that part. Next, so our DNA is actually made to reach into these multiple domains, and we do it through our heart, where the AI is limited, and that's why the AI is in that box. That's why that robotic being running on AI can be fast, can be efficient, can be useful, can be a lot of company. I mean, these chat GPTs, they are company, keeping people company. They can do all that, but they will never be able to move beyond the limitations. And that's what that visual is all about, because they're not reaching in to the domain that we call our spirituality, that we call our divinity. And that's what sets us apart from all other forms of life.
Yeah.
We are the product of at least 3/4 of a century of indoctrination, telling us that we are a flawed form of life. We're flawed by virtue of our existence. We're flawed from birth, and that we need something outside of ourselves to be the best version of ourselves and to compete effectively in the world. So that is pretty much hardwired into most people in the Western world, not so in other traditions, but in the West. And so that is that sets up the perfect storm for this technology to come swooping in and fill that need. You know, we can't ignore, this isn't in a vacuum. We're living a time of extremes. We're living a time, it's not a secret anymore, when we've been told that there's a concerted effort to make the world into something that it's never been, and to make us into something that we've never been. Now, there have always been attempts to change the world. What's new here is in our 5,000 to 6,000 years of recorded history, we haven't had the technology to change who we are. And we do now. And that technology, very vocally, the World Economic Forum has said very vocally that we're in what's called the fourth industrial revolution, the Great Reset.
When you look at the people that are advocating for this, the developers, the CEOs of the companies and whatnot, my observation is always that there is very little, if any, spiritual awareness or broader awareness in those folks. So they operate from a very human standpoint, consciousness is in the brain kind of level, and that's where they're at. So they're, in my perception, they're missing the broadest piece of the story. And so their idea of solution is incredibly limited and will come back to bite us in the ass. What can you say to those who currently maybe can't see that, or who think that AI might be this incredible godlike solution?
Well, you know, John, those developers, and I've met some, I have known them in my life. I've worked side by side with them in the industry. I'm not going to say that I think for the most part, they're lost. They don't know who they are. And they're looking for technology to tell them who they are, or to compensate for what they believe is their flaw in their lives, because they are the product of the indoctrination that tells us that we need something outside of ourselves. The whole point of the transhuman movement that we haven't even talked about a lot here, but the AI is deeply related to part of that transhuman movement. Trans means beyond for our viewers that may not be familiar with that. Trans is beyond human, so beyond human. The whole goal of that movement is immortality because they're afraid of what it means beyond this world, and they don't trust their bodies to have the capacity for healing and longevity. That we're hardwired. We're wired for longevity and healing, but that's not part of the indoctrination. They don't know that, or if they do, they don't believe it. So there is, on another level, and you and I have talked about this, everything we're talking about is happening within the context of a deeply spiritual struggle between what we call good and evil. Evil is defined in the new book, evil is defined in our conversations as the masking or the veiling of our divinity. Our divinity is our ability to imagine, to innovate, to create, to love, to forgive, to heal, empathy, sympathy, compassion. These are all expressions of human divinity. And from this perspective, anything that denies or steals those abilities is an expression of evil. When we allow AI to write our term papers and to write the lyrics to our songs and to write our music and to create our art, and I'm not saying one-off is going to end the world, but when it becomes a way of life, we have given our power away to the technology. That's an expression of evil. We've denied our own divine capabilities of innovating and writing and creating. And now the psychology is backing this up with there are articles in like Psychology Today and psychological journals, people that are relying upon AI, ChatGPT specifically, since 2022 for creative writing are losing the ability to creatively write. They're losing the ability to create and hold the sentence structure and to carry the thoughts through the way that they had before. And it's because their brain is changing. We've seen this with virtual reality. Young people who use VR goggles, they did a study with young kids from 3 to 5 years old that were using these VR goggles 3 to 4 hours a day to be entertained while their parents were working. They had cognitive impairment, all right? They were impaired speech, impaired problem solving, impaired socialization, but their brain changed. Their visual cortex, the physical tissue in their brain enlarged. That part of their brain was growing out of proportion because that's what they're using. The visual cortex, they weren't imagining what they were seeing. All they were doing was watching things be performed for them through the VR. All right. So their visual cortex was enlarging, but these other areas were stunted. Now, because of epigenetics, when they recognized that and they changed their lifestyle, that was remedied. They were young enough, able to, remedy the speech and problem solving and socialization and all that. So the same principle applies to AI. When we're using the AI to do our creative processes, our ability to do those begins to atrophy. And I think this is something that we need to be aware of. Thank everyone behind the scenes that's helping make this possible today, and everyone tuning in. We love you. Thank you for having an open mind and an open heart, and just allowing us to share some perspectives, hopefully that are empowering in your life. And I look forward to our next.
Gregg Braden, empowering, the title of his new book, Pure Human, fully here. Inspired Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in. We love you, we appreciate you, and we will be back with you again very, very soon.